can get more conversations in less time.
Amazing. Okay, let's do it live. And I cannot see the LinkedIn comments from this browser window, so I have to go to LinkedIn and log into our live stream in order to see the comments. So we will be recording this as well. So this will be available after the LinkedIn Live. And I'll try, as we're going through the conversation, to get over to the LinkedIn comments and see if anybody has any comments, or they're just saying hi, or they're heckling us, or whatever, they're doing over there. But Ryan Reisert, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. For people who don't know Ryan, I mean, this guy has forgotten more about cold calling and the strategy behind successful cold calling than most people know. He's been doing this for, I would say, most of your career, and you've developed this expertise in this topic that I think is unparalleled, Ryan.
Yeah, I've been at it about coming on 17 years now. So, and prior to that, I did telemarketing in high school too. So it's been probably a good 18 years of cold calling.
Yeah. It's been a minute. And you've seen all these different waves come and go. And for folks who are just joining us, the title of this webinar is a bit maybe misleading. We're not going to actually be ripping calls today on the call, on this call. We'll have to do that one of these days, but I don't have the technological chops to be able to set that up right now. So what we are going to be talking about, though, is why is cold calling so effective? How do you make it work? And what's the difference between like the hype behind cold calling and what the reality is? And Ryan, like I said, you've been a student of this game. You've been working in this area for years. And first and foremost, how do you look at cold calling from a high level with the strategy? You used to call them the buckets, right?
Yep.
And then how do you implement that today in with all the new technologies that's coming out?
Yeah, for sure. So take a step back for those that don't know me. What David's talking about right now is my book, Outbound Sales No Fluff. Wrote this 2017. So almost a decade ago. And that was written after about a decade of doing this. And so the early part of my career, I worked my way up from lead generation specialist, which is the SDR of today's world, to AE. Back then they were called sales directors. And then eventually the director of sales at my first startup, and had a couple of stints as VP sales at venture-backed companies when David and I met back in the 2010s era, I guess. So that's where I developed my process. So back then, and even still today, the phone was always the most efficient way to revenue, right? If we think about outbound, the goal, the North Star for a sales leader is that you can develop a system and a process that when your salespeople are not in scheduled interactions with your customers, right? Back then, lots of face-to-face. I was just having this conversation recently about why I think Zooms and all that stuff is killing sales too, because everyone tries to push for these meetings. And in the beginning of the sales process, meetings, the way that we think about meetings, don't really matter. We need to have an intro sales conversation, whether that's via a Zoom, over the phone, doesn't really matter. We need to have a conversation with our market to introduce what we're doing, qualify, and determine if it makes sense to move into the actual sales meeting. Back then, you would go on site a lot more than you do today. That was a lot more difficult to secure. So you'd have lots of conversations over the phone. And if we're going to do a bunch of work to get people into conversations, I'm trying to get you on the phone. Why wouldn't I just shortcut the path to the phone? And so early on, I was always trying to figure out, how do I get more people on the phone as efficiently as possible. And as a sales leader, again, if my sales team is not in conversations with my market, whether they're scheduled or unscheduled, I want to have a system and a process to get them into their next best sales conversation. And so that's where Buckets was created. I've been, a huge student of sales for a very long time. Read all the books. Been through most of the training, um, and every sales process or methodology has clear stage definitions and exit criteria from the time you get into that first scheduled interaction, right? In your CRM, you would call that opportunity pipeline, right? You've got, maybe that starts at stage 0, meeting scheduled. It might be stage 1, meeting held, SQL, whatever the heck you want to call it, right? It's very clear for a salesperson to manage a pipeline once you had a meeting, right? You have a meeting, you're going to try to drive them forward. Like meeting goes to demo, presentation goes to proposal, negotiation, close, whatever it might be. And a good seller knows that in order to be really efficient, you would show up today and I would work my pipeline from closest to revenue backwards, right? I would go in and, work stuff that we're negotiating, get that done, get the contracts out, get them signed. When I'm done with that, I'd move into proposals. And when I'm done with those, I'd move to my demo follow-ups, and then I would be prepared for my demos. And if I had some time, I'd go prospect. The problem is there's no clear stage definitions and exit criteria for what we do from a lead to a meeting, right? So lead generation still to this day is run like I get a list and I try to set a meeting. That's the only stage movement, right? It's lead, meeting, lead, meeting. But what Buckets does is actually create stage definitions and exit criteria at the lead stage, right? So there's 4 main buckets. Uncontacted would be the first stage, right? This is a list of all the accounts. If you're a sales rep in your territory, if you're an organization that you would ever want to sell to, right? We call this your total addressable market. And here's all the accounts, and then all the people within those accounts that we would ever really want to sell. Our people call them ICP, ideal customer profile, personas, whatever they might be. I call this a swim lane, right? So uncontacted leads would be everything that is a qualified account and a person at an organization that could influence a decision towards making a purchase, right? It doesn't have to be the decision maker. It could be someone within the buying committee. Those are uncontacted leads. So as you build lists, most people today will go to ZoomInfo, buy a list, kind of do some basic firmographic, technographics where most of the accounts aren't even qualified. They just grab them and they're doing like a title search, grabbing them and throw them into a sequence. Problem with that is there's a bunch of leads in there that shouldn't even be moving forward in this process, because at the uncontacted stage 1, what you're doing in this stage is you're looking at the leads and you're evaluating, is this account qualified? Is this contact in my ICP? Does it meet the criteria? If so, then I would move it forward to the next stage, which is working. And in order to work a lead, they have to be qualified. If they're not, you get them out, right? This is inbound, outbound. It doesn't matter. I first look at it, which people don't do anymore, before I make a call. And I determine, is it good or not? In order to move to working, I start to work it. So I'm doing activities towards those leads in the channels I'm going to use. We'll just use the phone as the example because it's all about cold calling. So in order to go from uncontacted to working, I have to actually call the lead. To go to working, it's moving forward or out, right? So to work a lead, I have to have a number for a contact that's qualified, right? Everything above it's still true. And the number has to actually get through to either the person or a working voicemail. If that doesn't happen, then it's not workable, right? That lead is not workable. I don't have a working number for it. So I'd kick it out, right? So everything in my working bucket is somebody that meets all the criteria for me to want to have a conversation with, and I begin working them. I have a number I can call. And it has to get to a working voicemail or to them. If it doesn't, it's out. Now in my working bucket, I'm going to start calling until that person picks up. Once they pick up, it's going to move to the next phase, which is a priority lead. A priority is someone that meets all that extra criteria with a number where I know I can reach them. And then regardless of what happened in that, right, in the priority, I'm trying to not just book meetings, but I'm getting yeses, nos, not me's, not nows. And a priority lead is someone that meets all that criteria. I'm going to get stuff that I thought you were the right person, but I learned that you're disqualified, get them out. If they're qualified, but it's not a not now, There's a future follow-up date. That's a priority lead. And that's the golden list, by the way. And we'll talk about the metrics in a second. But now I'm building my buckets to priorities. And then once I schedule someone, that's my final stage. So there's 4 buckets: uncontacted, working, priority, scheduled. What I just did there was create stage definitions and exit criteria at the top of the funnel that never existed before. Everyone else is going leads, meeting, leads, meeting. And so if a rep showed up and I want that system and a process to say, if I'm not in a scheduled interaction, how do I get to my next best conversation? I had no clean way to go into my CRM and go, leads, which ones do I already know are a fit, and pick up the phone? I don't know. I just kind of randomly call through tasks or whatever. But with buckets, I now have, if I'm done with my meetings scheduled and I'm moving backwards, I would go to my priorities. When I start to call my priorities, these are people that have already picked up the phone before. And if your average dial to connect rate is like 5% on a cold list, right? A priority list will pick up at like 20 to 30%. So instead of having to make 20 dials to get a conversation, I can average a conversation every 4 or 5 dials on my priority leads. Not to mention, these are actually qualified, not this research qualified from my uncontacted bucket, but I've spoken to them. I know they're the right person at the right company. They have some awareness of me potentially. I've gathered information on where they're at in their process, who they use, etc. And as I follow up with them, I have a 5 to 10, sometimes 10x higher connect rate, and my conversion rate on those leads improves by 1.5 to 3 times. So if I convert cold leads at like 10% of a cold call to a meeting, my follow-ups, my priority leads will be somewhere in like the 15 to 30% range, right? So more connects, higher conversion rate, I get pipeline created a lot faster. So that was the bucketing process. And when I'm done with my priorities, if I'm done calling out other people I've spoken to before, I don't just go to the cold stuff again. I go to my working. Why do I go to my working next? Well, these are only good numbers. So then I can start doing higher volume of calling, knowing that I don't have to work through a bunch of disconnected numbers, fax tones, hurting your ear, dealing with gatekeepers that don't transfer. I don't know the dial tree path, so it takes me 2.5 minutes to go through a number. All the working data is documented. I know it's a good number. I know the path to them. I'm going to call those next. And then once I'm done with those, then I'd move back to my uncontacted. So now that I have this stage definition criteria with buckets, reps are really dialed in for where do they start their day, and their day is a lot more efficient. They're getting momentum, and then where they end their day to basically backfill your buckets. So that's the process I created a long time ago. Wrote about it in Outbound Sales No Fluff, and that's kind of what kicked off all the start of the consulting work I started to do after my sales career, where I started, kind of building this system and process through different companies to teach people how to do this. But that is the process, and it's still what I use today. I've just created more, kind of shortcuts to getting that done for organizations.
Yeah, trust the process, right? You're not just, because you came into this from a mathematical background, right? And you looked at how people were doing this before, and there was that gap of understanding where you didn't have any metrics at the beginning to understand how it's flowing through the buckets. And so you looked at that, and you used to talk about the math of sales. And I don't know if that's still relevant, but without any inputs, how are you supposed to do the math, right?
Absolutely. I mean, math of sales drives this whole entire process, right? When you think about how do you set quotas? How do you know how you're going to hit your goal? Your math of sales is your math of sales. So your math of sales is all of the ratios, starting with close one, all the way backwards to your dial to connect rate, right? So if you know your win rate, you know your sales accepted rate, you know your show rate on meetings, you know your meeting scheduled rate, you know your completion rate, which is basically your priority bucket conversion rates, you know your connect rate. By knowing all of that, you can reverse engineer exactly what your reps need to do every single day in order to always hit their numbers, right? Always within a degree of accuracy. It also drives how much data should be coming into the top of the funnel for replenish, because there's a bunch of math associated with on a list. One of the biggest challenges people have is people think that I got a list of people, let's say it's in that working bucket. I have a list of people in that working bucket. they think in their mind that if I call that list enough times, that I can get them on the phone at some point. But the reality is, every time you go through a list, there's going to be people who pick up and there's going to be people who will never pick up, right? To move forward into the priority bucket. And you want to know how many times you should attempt a person before you kick it out in that channel. And generally on a list, about 20 to 40% of that list will pick up the phone if you call them enough times. The rest never will. And so if you're calling on a list over and over and over again and not backfilling or replenishing your list, then this is what happens with a lot of the folks that are using parallel dialers today. You see this all the time. They're like, oh, it started off good, but our connect rate's shit now. Well, are you replenishing your data? Are you continuously putting in new leads at the top of the funnel? There's a whole math on this. Every time I get a connect, this is Jeb Blunt's thing, right? From Fanatical Prospecting. People know this with the very low funnel, which is if I have a 20% win rate and I close a deal, right? How many opportunities do I need to have in my pipeline to get the next deal? It's not one more, right? I close one. I don't need one more. If my close rate's 20%, I need 5 more, right? So if I have 5 deals in my pipeline, I close one, the math says that the other 4 are probably not going to close. So I would have to go and get 5 more for the one every time. That same ratio continues on all of your conversion rates through the entire funnel, right? And so for list replenish, when you know your ratios, you can know every time I get a connect, right? Every time I get a connect based on my list reach rate, which is going to be somewhere in the 40%, I can't replenish it with just one more contact to make up the person just connected. It might be 5 more, right? So I have to add 5 to get to one conversation, and then that's going to go all the way through. And usually when you're on track, and this is even for inbound, right? For every 100 contacts, you're probably going to get, maybe 3 to 5 solid opportunities from that entire list. And that makes sense if you understand Chet Holmes' buyer's pyramid and how many people are in market and like open and buying now, that type of stuff, right? So 3% are buying now, 5% or 7% are open to it, 30% aren't thinking about it, so on and so forth. So there's a ton of math in this. And these are all the things that I studied and put into process early on. And this is a very, very mathematically based process. And when you know your math of sales, you know exactly what you need to do in terms of list size, reps to manage, the number of dials someone needs to make every day. But the thing is, everybody focuses on things like meetings or SQLs or something lower. But the number one metric that matters the most is how many daily completed conversations are you having with your market? That is the one metric that matters the most. And if you manage towards completions, which is I reached the person on my list, they understood what I had to offer, and I got to a yes and no and not me and not now, that is literally all that matters at the top of the funnel. With that metric, if your reps are consistently hitting that over day, you'll get out and within 12 to 18 months be dominating your market.
Okay. And so if you have the tools, you've got people, you've got all these systems and things like that, who usually would own the initiative to get your arms around all the numbers and start to work this process? Now you are doing consulting with companies to implement this. So you can come in and just get it set up, for the companies, but say they haven't yet started working with you. Who usually owns this initiative, and how would they get started in implementing this?
Yeah, it should be owned by whoever owns revenue, right? Whoever owns a revenue target.
So the head of sales or
the CRO or the head of sales
okay.
Should typically own this process. And generally what I'm working with, I work with a lot of startups, so it's mostly like founder, or maybe they have a sales leader, founder, CEO, maybe they have a CRO or like a small team. And the very first thing we do in my process when I'm working with someone is actually get to math of sales. So I say, what's your current state? Let's actually go through what are these ratios? And the reality is most people aren't tracking this well, right? So they might have decent numbers on their lower funnel stuff, that what everyone has, the sales funnel pipeline stuff. So they'll know their win rate. They'll know their sales accepted rate on meetings that show. But after that, the data is not very good. And so we go through a consultation, look at their current state, and then I show them. The reality is right now they're looking at it from the function of lead gen. So their first conversion metric is typically dial to connect. Maybe they may or may not track that very well. Um, and that's because they rely on the dialers to give them a connect rate. And that's a really bad way to do that, because the dialers typically, a lot of them anyway, will track a connect based on talk time. So like, oh, anything that had like a, more than a minute talk time is probably a connect. Well, that's not true. Like there's gatekeepers in there. That's not a connect. There's IVR navigation. That's not a connect. There's reps that will sit there and listen to voicemails for a really long period of time just to get their, their connects up. It's just not a connect. It should be driven by actual call results. So dispositions from your system. So, but they'll usually have connect rate, which is usually wrong. And then they'll have scheduled rate. But what I show them is like, there's actually two other conversions that you want to track, which is a completion rate and an activation rate. And so I show them their current state, I show them their future state, and walk them through an exercise. It's the math of sales exercise. So most organizations have SDRs doing about 50 dials a day. Those 50 dials result in about 3, maybe 4 conversations if they're lucky. And if you run the math all the way through on their scheduled rate, show rate, accepted rate, win rate, it takes about an average SDR is contributing about 1 deal every 3 months. And if your ACV is like less than 50K, that math's not mathing. And even at 50K, the math's not mathing. So it really only works if you have these really high ACVs. And so with my system, when I install it and show them that you can improve connect rates, you can start to look at building buckets, and that's going to also increase your conversion rates over time. One SDR can contribute a deal in less than a month, right? Yeah. And now all of a sudden you can use the phone for lower ACV products, and you get much more productivity out of a rep, right? So typically installing this system and process will take an average rep, and one rep that produces at what an average rep produces in the lead gen model versus the buckets model will have about a 3 to 5x increase in their total production on a month-to-month basis. So again, said differently, is they're doing what a normal rep does in 3 months in a month, or maybe even in a half a month, right? So every 2 weeks you're getting the same amount of production at the higher end that average rep does in 3 months, or it's like every month for 3 months. So you're compressing the time, or said differently, you could take a team of 10 and reduce it to 2 and get the same amount of production. So there's that's what I walk them through in the beginning. From there, most people, they're just all over the place. So I say, look, let me show you how this works. Give me your list. I'll process the list through the methodology. I have a backend system set up that has all this already going. It's in Salesforce with my dialer and all this other stuff. I'll take the messaging they're running. I'll recreate that into my call framework that produces, focused on completions, not lead generation. And I'll run a pilot for them. So I take the list, process the list, build a message, get on with them inside of an actual call blitz, which is a virtual sales floor. I just acquired an equity stake in this business, by the way. So it's a virtual sales floor. We get into it, and we'll call for like 3 hours. During that three-hour session, I'll show them what we went through in the exercise. Here's the increase in connections. I'll also show them what it's like to manage a virtual sales organization in the sales floor. So you can actually have a leader in here. You can blitz and coach live. You're having a conversation every like 3 to 5 dials, so you can rapidly hone your message. You get people actually producing. A rep in this system running all day long goes from having 2 to 4 conversations a day to something like 40 to 60. And they do that without using parallel dialing, right? It's a one-to-one dialer. If you can have 40 to 60 conversations in a day, imagine how much learnings you get. You're getting the same amount of learnings on, are we targeting the right people? Are we saying the right things? That usually take a month or two. And you're doing that every single day. Within a week, you got a rep already producing at the same rate that it usually takes them 90 days to ramp to. And so now you're rapidly learning, rapidly honing the process. In this pilot, I'm showing them the back-end reporting and dashboards that I could set up for them. And if they want to proceed from there, then I build out this system for them inside their Salesforce, enable the dialer, work with their team, do some sessions on training them up, and then pass that system off. So that's what I'm doing these days for my consulting business.
And then when you first start to analyze the data, are there must be lots of big holes in it. I mean, where they just don't, there's nothing there, right? And so you kind of have to start from that point and say, I mean, based on this, we need 10 times more phone numbers, or we need 10 times more names in the system and things like that. Do you find that happens?
Yeah, exactly. So we do the pilot. We now plug in the real numbers of what the math of sales might look like if they were to do this at scale. Again, it's only a 3-hour session, but we'll have data now on 20 to 30 conversations in that time frame, right?
Okay.
So I'll be able to go in and go, like, your connect rate was 5%, it's now 25%. Your schedule rate was 10% on connects, but it's now 15% on completions. And the reason why is because we get there's some math on that. Okay, so we run all the numbers.
Yeah.
Based on that, if we installed this system and we put reps into this and they were doing this every single day, we reverse all the way down to literally saying, hey, in order to keep one rep productive, you need this many leads coming in every month, right? And that rep needs to do this many dials. You can expect this many completions. And let's actually look at your market. Do you even have enough leads in your market, right? That's something that we pull out of the math and sales consultation post-pilot. But the number one thing that we see constantly is when we get to that pilot phase, the first thing I do is like, give me your list. Well, when I get a list, it's just all over the place, right? Like, the list of accounts are ranging from different sizes, different industries. There's no like clear target to message mapping, right? In order to be successful, you need one list, one message for each campaign. Now you can run different messaging against your audiences, especially if you have multiple products or multiple segments to go into. But if you're going to enable your reps to be successful, every time they pull up a list, the message that they're going to deliver that list in the cold call needs to be consistent. And so we identify that right away. Accounts are all over the place. There's no clear alignment on like, why are we calling, someone in retail and then right after that finance and then someone else in
Sure.
in tech, right? Like that needs to get cleaned up. And then if it is in multiple industries, because there's some sort of clear business case for the persona, well, then that list needs to be only that persona, right? So I might have a clean list of accounts, but then in the list of contacts, you're talking to marketing, you're talking to sales, you're talking to finance. Like, what are you doing, right? You can't bounce around like that. So have a very clear campaign structure. That's something that pops up right away. Mm-hmm. And then, we're doing a lot of consultation on how to get the list process moving. And the big thing that most organizations struggle with right now is they're relying on their SDRs to go out and build these lists. When, again, the list and the revenue should be at the revenue level. So leadership should be sitting down and saying, these are the accounts we want to go after. These are the people in the accounts that we want to talk to. And if there's multiple personas, this message to this persona, this message to this persona, this message to this persona. Once you have that set up and you enable reps with this process, they can get in, load their lists, and start working their buckets. And their buckets can also be based on each of those campaign structures, right? So that's all the stuff I set up for them. But immediately they're going to start seeing, again, this massive increase in productivity and rapid learnings, because the hypothesis of we think that this is the right person changes pretty quickly when you can go and talk to 30 of them in a day, right? Yeah. I think that my ideal customer is this persona at this company type, but you go talk to 30 of them and every single one is like, that's not me. I'm not interested because, oh, well, we're getting referred into this other department, half the time. I think maybe we should target these people, not these people. And so you can just rapidly test and iterate until you get your message market fit nailed. And once you get that nailed, then you just kind of follow those gold veins. Once you find something that works, you just backfill it, right? Just go exhaust that market.
Keep going. And do you think that what's holding people back is one, that this is pretty hard to do? It's difficult at the beginning at a high level. It's like maybe nobody really wants to do it, of the hard work at the beginning. And then at the second part, maybe they just don't know about buckets, and they just, you identified that gap in the measurement process. They just don't know that you should be starting at that level to really enhance the list for the reps.
Oh yeah, I mean, nobody. So list building is the last thing anyone wants to do.
Yeah.
And if you put it on leadership, especially, there's like, this doesn't feel like it's a good use of my time.
Mm-hmm.
But again, if you're a sales leader, your mission is to make sure that your salespeople, if they're not in a scheduled interaction with your ideal customers,
Mm-hmm.
then they have a system and a process to get to their next best conversation. If you rely on anyone else besides you as the leader to pick who your salespeople should be talking to, you shouldn't be upset when you go to pipeline review and go, where the hell are the qualified leads, right? Why are we talking to these people? Like, it should never get there in the first place. If you run buckets properly, those never even move forward in the process because somebody at the top said, this is the account that we know we want to break into. These are people within those accounts that we are that are worth spending time actually talking to. And the thing is, most people try to shortcut this with, buying lists from data vendors. They'll say that contact data, premium contact data, even at like, let's say 30 to 50 cents for an enriched number, for example, they'll be like, that's expensive. No, what's really expensive is having your reps spend labor dialing a contact that should never dial in the first place. Like, there's no point of them calling that person ever. Because if you just do the math on an SDR, let's say an SDR makes 5K a month. So it's like $30 an hour. An average rep is going to make 50 dials a day. You're paying, $8 to, $16 for a freaking dial. For a dial, one dial.
Wow.
And when your dial to connect rate is 5%, you're spending hundreds of dollars just to get a conversation. Right? Do you want to spend $100 for a conversation that could have just been weeded out in the first place? Not to mention how much time is wasted on the follow-up and all that stuff on those people. So sitting down, putting the work in to get the list right, making sure that there's very clear definitions on these are the accounts and these are the people. They don't have to individually go through that, but they can define it very well. And then what I do with my my clients now too is, over the last few years, I've built basically a BPO in the Philippines. So I have access to lots of VAs. It's like, go get a really smart VA in the Philippines, give them the definitions of exactly what to look for, how to qualify an account based on your criteria, not just rely on the data vendor's result that comes out of it, right? So when you go and try to pull, manufacturers, you're not getting agencies that support manufacturing companies, as an example. Like, just click on the website. Like, that's a marketing agency. It's not a manufacturing company, that type of stuff. Same thing with the people. You pull a list from ZoomInfo these days, which is still good data if you clean it, but ZoomInfo has 15% of the list where if you just click their LinkedIn URL, they haven't been at the company. Like, they're not there anymore. They haven't been there for years. In some cases, they might have recently changed jobs, or in a lot of cases, they haven't been there for years, or they say retired. It's like, just get that stuff out before it moves forward in the process. And by enabling a lead generation specialist, not an SDR, to do this work, or a rep if they're full stack, you can operationalize the list to the point where it's getting into buckets. And then, of course, I just sold my business Phone Ready Leads about a year and a half ago. Now it's called TitanX. But if you take that and throw it through TitanX, you can then rapidly accelerate the list through buckets from uncontacted to working, to know these are the ones that actually pick up the phone. This is the stuff I send to my sales floor. These are people at companies in roles that we want to talk to who actually pick up the phone. We put that in front of them. We've just accelerated the path to conversation. And that's how the teams I'm working with are able to actually average a conversation every 3 to 5 dials versus every 30 to 50.
It's right? Crazy. It's a filtration process. And this Brennan on in the chat asked a really good question. What if he understands what you're saying and it totally makes sense, but the company that he works for is still using the old school process of, like, here's a list, just go do it. They're basically throwing SDRs and sales reps at the old process that is, I mean, let's face it, it's either a lazy process or they just don't know about buckets. But his company is still doing it that way. what should he do as just an individual SDR to go, no, there's a much smarter way to do this?
If I'm an SDR at a company that's not enabling me with this process, I would start to move up to the next closest person to revenue. So I'm guessing you're probably supporting an AE or two. I would get with those AEs and say, hey, let's work together. You help me define your wish list, your dream list. This is from The Ultimate Sales Machine, Chet Holmes, right? If you haven't read that book, I highly recommend it. Like, build your dream list of accounts. This is the idea of the accounts, right? Go to the AEs as a first step and say, hey, work with me. Like, help me get, at the very least, the accounts that if I sent you a lead, whether it's a meeting or just what I would call an activated lead, meaning meeting scheduled, or someone who is qualified, has a lot of interest, there's some intent, there's intrigue, or they're giving us a ton of information that says they should be talking to sales right now. If I got you the right person at that account who you and I agreed is like the people you actually want to talk to, I'll go do the heavy lifting of going after them, but you work with me so that when I get these people into conversations, we can rapidly move them into the next sales conversation as efficiently as possible. So I would go to my AEs first, because that's the person who has the next level of interest in actually wanting to be more efficient at driving revenue, right? And if you don't have AEs that are going to help you, then try to go to your manager and say, look, I think that if you could help me actually get the damn accounts that we want to go after, and if I'm not getting someone to actually build the list, then I'm going to go and take the time, not in my golden hours when I should be prospecting in the middle of the day during the business week, but at nights and weekends, put in the extra work and go through and get your list clean. Slow down to speed up. And so go through these leads one-to-one and make sure that they're the actual right people. From there, and a lot of companies are not investing in additional enrichment, but there's like really affordable, high quality tools on the market right now. Like one that I've been testing recently is Lead Magic. Lead Magic, even as a rep, you could go buy mobile data credits from them. They're like 5 cents for a mobile credit, and it's just as good, if not better, than Zoom data when it comes to the quality of it. And I would be pulling out of pocket myself to get that data if I needed to at least make sure that I have coverage on phone numbers outside of whatever data vendor you might be using internally. So you can take that list, you take the LinkedIn URLs, enrich it through a Lead Magic, and then add that to the top of your sequencer, and you're going to start seeing a lot more productivity. So you can start to hack your way through this. We talked about this in Outbound Sales, No Fluff, even in 17. If you're relying on the company to do this all for you, you can do it yourself. It's just you're going to have to put in the extra hours. But I promise you, if you put the time in and you build your buckets, this is like anything, right? You're not going to get results tomorrow, but if you commit to this process and put in the work and build your buckets over time, within 6 to 12 months, you're gonna have that 5 to 10x increase in connect rates, and you're gonna have a 1.5 to 3x increase in your conversion rates. And when you combine those two, that's going to give you that 8 to 15x lever on productivity. So the same amount of work in 6 to 12 months is going to produce, like, you're just going to dominate quota, right? The problem is everyone is so short-sighted and thinking about what can I do right now in this moment in time, and they don't put in the reps. It's like fitness, right? Go to the gym one time. Are you going to get fit? No. But if you go to the gym multiple times a week over the course of a year, in 1 year, you're going to be jacked, right? You're going to be jacked. But no one does it. They give up after a month and a half. You can't do that. So if you're Drew in the comments, he asked if you haven't aged at all in 17 years. So this is a guy that you want to listen to because it's so true. It's that compound effect. You put in the hard work. You might not see anything for the first couple months, but then all of a sudden, zoom, you're increasing it. So and now you've created and sold several companies. Now you're doing call blitz and you're consulting, but phone ready leads was really interesting in that you took the bucket concept that you're talking about and then you operationalized it, and now it's part of another company. What was phone ready leads and how did it support this? Yeah, phone ready leads is your Disneyland Fast Pass for buckets, right? That's what it is. Or now they call it like the lightning lane, I think. It's your Disneyland lightning lane. So the hardest part of all this stuff, the work that you have to do up front, is taking a list from uncontacted and putting it into working, and really trying to get it to priority, right? Figuring out who picks up the phone. Once you know that this is the right person at the right company who picks up the phone, and you keep following up with them, like that's how you get to market dominance. So what Phone Ready Leads does is it outsources the work to figuring out who on your list actually picks up the phone. And that's done through a combination of process and some modern technology. But you can think of it almost like a never bounce or a email validation for email, right? You take a list, you throw it into a system, and it says, hey, these ones will bounce if you email them. Don't email them. It's the same thing. You take a list, you throw it into, it's now called TitanX. TitanX will take that list and run it through the process and say, hey, out of all these leads, these are the ones you should call. And if you score it enough times, you can run it through multiple times. If you score it through enough times, you know for sure these are the ones you should call. These are the ones that you may not want to, or you could call and leave voicemails and do email if you wanted to get into that strategy, like the Tony Hughes combo. But they're not likely to pick up the phone, but they are name verified. These are the ones that are probably not worth calling at all, because you don't even know if the number is the right number for the person. And these ones you absolutely shouldn't call at all, because they're all bad, right?
Yeah.
And generally on a list, if you take a list and throw it through this process and process it enough times, again, 20 to 40% are likely to pick up. Another, let's say 30 to 50% are name verified. You could do a multi-channel strategy too. Another 30 to 50% are the probably email, social only, and then another 10 to 20%. So in those ranges are not worth the phone at all. We call those needs attention. So this system will do all that work for you and operationalize your buckets before you do any work. So now all of a sudden you go from uncontacted to they're essentially priorities, but they're a working bucket of future priorities that are going to come to the rate of a conversation every 3 to 5 dials versus every 30 to 50. What happens with a sequencer, if you take a list and run this through yourself and you start to do this work yourself, you're going to waste 80 to 90% of your dial attempts calling people that will never pick up the phone. So for those of you that are following along and you want to get a sense of how many times you should attempt the number, if I take a list and I call a list one time, the people that will have picked up one time through that list represents about 20% of the people that will ever pick up. If I call through 5 times, that represents about 80%. So the Pareto principle is in play here, right? 80-20. So if you go through 5 times, you've pretty much gotten the 80% of the people that are worth calling out. By 10 times, it's 95%. By 20 times, it's 98%. So the sweet spot's probably somewhere in the 7 to 10%, depending on how big your addressable market is, to know that if I'm in the working bucket, I should not call more than probably 10 times. I mean, you could go more if it's like a really high value target and you have a small market, but your dial to connect rate on that list is going to be like 300 dials to get one person on the phone by the time it gets to the end. The other thing to note is if you call a list one time and your connect rate's 5%, the remaining records in that working bucket that are available to call again, it's going to decay by about 80%. So 5% is going to go to 4%, then 4% is going to go to 3%, then 3% is going to go to 2%, then 2% is going to go to 1%. So every time I go through the list, my connect rate is going to plummet. So that's why you have to backfill. And so when you're doing this all yourself, if I take a list, and you guys can all go and fact check me if you want to, if you're using a sequencer and you actually have multiple steps in there, go check this out. Go to your last sequence that you've added people to, look at everything that's been completed in that sequence. Say there was 1,000 people in that sequence, and you completed that sequence and you got 200 people to pick up, something like that. It's 200 that completed out of that, replies, responses. Most of those, if you're calling heavy, will be phone pickups, right? If you look at the total number of dials to the other 800 people out of the 200 so there's 200 that picked up, and there's the other 800 that never picked up. If you look at the total number of attempts to the other 800, it's going to represent 80 to 90% of the total dials in that entire process. Only 20% of your dials got to the 200 that picked up, and the majority of them would have picked up within the first 3 to 5 attempts. 80% of those will have already picked up within the first 3 to 5 attempts. So you're wasting dials just doing activities for no reason. And so when you're running this process, what TitanX or Phone Ready Leads does is it basically just says, hey, instead of wasting 80 to 90% of your time calling people that will never pick up, just focus your time on the ones that do pick up. And that's when you get this massive increase in connect rates, but you're also not wasting time in a channel that's never going to get you a reach in the first place.
Mm-hmm. You could see how you could get so frustrated as a rep, because it's like, hey, I just spent the whole day dialing, calling people, running all these different campaigns. I didn't talk to anybody the whole day. You know, it's like, now I got to come in the next day, you know, or you're working from home. You're just like, I just got nothing going on right now. And instead, I think it's because they spent the whole day calling the 80%, right?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if they're not replenishing, or if they're not backfilling their list, it's only going to get worse every day, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you have
it's a leaky bucket.
If you show up today, you call and you feel good because you got 10 out of 100, you make 100 dials, you talk to 10 people. Tomorrow, if you call that same list and you didn't replenish, you might have 80 remaining because there was 10 bad numbers, 10 that picked up, the rest were worth calling. You have 80, that connect rate on the 80 is only going to be probably 8 to 9%. And so now you're only going to get like 7 or 8 connects on 80 dials. And then you do it again, it's going to continue to replenish. You're going to have to do more dials to get less connects, and you're going to have less leads in your funnel. So you have to keep backfilling these to keep your connect rate consistent over time. And that's a big frustration, because you'll see reps that will pull these big lists, throw it in there. They'll go into a Nooks or an Orem and just hammer the hell out of it. And they go and they celebrate making 1,000 dials today. 1,000 dials got them 20 or 30 conversations, 2 to 3% connect rate. Tomorrow they make another 1,000 dials and they're only getting, 19 to 23 connections. And then the next day they do 1,000 dials and they're getting like 17, and it just deplenishes. And eventually they look at their connect rate and it's like 1%. So now they're making 1,000 dials and talking to 10 people. It's just a complete waste of time.
That's brutal. And so real quick before I forget, so people are asking, the Chet Holmes book, is that the ultimate sales machine that you were talking about?
Yeah, Ultimate Sales Machine by Chet Holmes.
Okay, great
and
book. Then Jeb Blount, you mentioned, was it called Predictable Prospecting?
No, Fanatical Prospecting.
Fanatical Prospecting. Okay, and then your book is Outbound Sales No Fluff.
I can send a digital copy of my book. We'll post it with this. I got a PDF if people want it. I also have it in the Audible book version for free as a podcast if people want access to Outbound Sales No Fluff.
It's so great. I mean, it's just, it takes, an hour to read, and it can completely revolutionize your cold calling. You also mentioned lead magic. And they were wondering what does that do?
It's a data enrichment tool. So if you already have another data vendor or you're doing your research on LinkedIn, you can load those LinkedIn URLs into Lead Magic, and they'll go out and find phone numbers. It's the only data vendor on the market right now that doesn't, when you do enrichment, send you 15 fucking phone numbers. It sends you, excuse my French, it sends you one, and it's the best one that they think matches. And Jesse, the founder of it, is doing a really good job of getting pretty good mobile data. Like if you match Lead Magic's data quality on the mobile side to even ZoomInfo, which is still the market leader more often than not for most segments, it's at and sometimes better than ZoomInfo's mobile data. And the starting package is like 5 cents for a mobile number. It's really, really affordable. And you can sign up for like $99 a month to get a bunch of credits. So I highly recommend checking it out and helping you get some additional numbers that you might not have if you're using especially shitty tools like a Seamless or an Apollo or something like that, which has really crappy data in it.
Okay. Well, I mean, by the way, all these tools are listed in Tenbound on the Tenbound site. Some of them have reviews and feedback from people that have used them. So this is great. I always learn about some new technology. And we had Brian in the comment said, best in the business, used PRL a few years ago, home run. And so obviously shortcutting the process and implementing this. I mean, I honestly think some of these new dialer technologies should hire you as a consultant to come in, because it's almost like the way that you make it sound is you're clear cutting, you're clear cutting your phone numbers and your data, and then you come in the next day and everything's gone. What do I do now? You know?
Yeah. There's two problems with call deliverability. Well, there's actually three problems with call deliverability.
Mm-hmm.
Number one is the list replenish stuff that we just talked about. So even if your dialer is doing a good job dialing out and the numbers aren't showing up as spam, as an example, if you're not replenishing your list, then your connect rate is going to plummet. And so some dialers get a bad rap because they're not educating their customers on making sure that they keep replenishing their list. So that's a not a dialer issue, but it's a dial to connect issue. The second is like a technical call deliverability problem, meaning your numbers are showing up as spam because of the dialer you're using. So some dialers are buying numbers from marketplaces that when you buy them, you may not even know this, but your caller ID is showing up as another business. It's showing up as spam likely, scam likely. It's showing up as some weird person's name. It's not your name because they're buying them from this marketplace and they never really cleaned the number, and that's impacting your connect rate because your caller ID is flagged, spammed, or some weird business name or something like that, right? So there's a technical issue with some of the dialers, and so you want to use a dialer that actually gets you clean numbers and has a process to clean and scan those numbers. The two I recommend as a one-to-one dialer that do a good job with this are Phone Burner and FrontSpin. I use FrontSpin these days, but both of them have good options for that. Phone Burner actually just released a product called Armor, which will actually, you regardless of the dialer you're using, you can put your numbers into Armor, and it will automatically be monitoring these numbers in real time, cleaning them, and making sure you have good call deliverability. So there's a technical issue. The third one that people don't realize either is impression share. So years ago, I would have followed the idea of the Tony Hughes combo, right? Go at somebody like a spider monkey, call, voicemail, email, call, voicemail, email, right? You actually don't want to do that because in today's market, especially when you're calling more mobile data today, you actually don't want to be known until you want to be known as a salesperson. So what I mean by that is if I call somebody and they don't pick up, I don't want to leave voicemails. I just want a clean number that's a missed number. And then I don't want to serve that same number too frequently. So if I call you, David, today, I definitely don't want to call you multiple times in the same day from the same number. That's an old school tactic, the double tap, the triple tap. You don't want to do that. Someone's going to, even if they don't mark you as spam, they might block you saying, oh, this is a salesperson. I would have picked up, but I was busy and now you're calling me multiple times. So I don't want to talk to that person. But I also don't want to call too frequently over a period of time because people, if I looked at my missed call list and I see the same number, even every day or every other day, again, I can flag myself as possibly a salesperson, and you're going to miss out on having a connection with someone that might have otherwise picked up. So you want to have the ability to rotate your numbers that you own. These are not spoof numbers. Not like if someone calls it back, you want it to call back, receive that, have a voicemail that's you, that they know it's you type of thing. But you can actually access the fact that someone called back, but you don't want to serve the same number too frequently because that can impact your connect rate. And again, I have all the data on this. I ran a business on solving for connect rate for a long time. And so those are the three things that you want to solve for. One is replenish. Two is deliverability, like the actual technical deliverability and the clean numbers, etc. And the third is impression count. You don't want to serve the same number too frequently, too often. And and with that dial strategy, these are things that obviously I help people set up, but this is where people fail when they're using some of these systems because they have a system that dials really fast from like one or maybe two numbers. And if that number is getting served too often, the carriers will flag them, but also the users will mark them as block them or mark them as spam as well.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's almost like email deliverability. I didn't realize that there's this whole specialty of, I guess you could call it phone deliverability. Or, you know, it's a lot of the same type of restrictions. Yeah.
Same exact concept. Yeah. All the carriers have that same kind of algorithm built in that you would see with like an email system. You can think of it the same way, right? An email, you don't want to send too many emails within a certain period of time or so many emails within a day, right? For the phone, all the carriers are different, by the way. So you could get a flag on AT&T and it won't be flagged on Verizon or T-Mobile, and vice versa. It's possible that that's happening. AT&T is the most restrictive. The problem with AT&T is it also has the most coverage, like more users on AT&T, but that's the hardest one to not get flagged on. And so what you want to do is make sure that if you're calling from the same caller ID, that you're not calling more than like 10 times in an hour. What they're looking at is the number of impressions to a carrier within a time frame, the connect rate to that carrier, the talk time from that carrier, and then manual flags. So if you're calling even just like 30 to 50 dials an hour, you want to have 3 to 5 numbers in rotation. And I actually recommend doubling that up. So if you're usually in my system, people are dialing at about 30 dials an hour. I have them have 10 numbers in rotation so that you're not serving the same number back to back to back to back to back to possibly the same carrier.
Holy cow. Okay. So you do you have like a Substack or like a blog or something where you're capturing all this, or we got to get this out of your head. When's the next book coming out?
Yeah, well, actually, so with Call Blitz, I just launched a community behind Call Blitz. So individuals can sign up for Call Blitz. With your solo license of Call Blitz, you actually get access to a live coaching session with me every week. I'm in there for an hour for this type of stuff, like ask me anything. And then we actually do live cold calling after that inside of Call Blitz. So with your Call Blitz account, you can go and listen to me call or other people call. It's a community, so it's based in school. Inside that community, I have like 100 hours of this same stuff. I've got a bunch of resources in there, call scripts, call frameworks. There's like 100 hours of call recordings that you can listen to. And then as a member, you can also join other people that are calling. So if you're like a solo rep somewhere or a part of a small team remote and you want to call with other people, you can be inside the community and find other people that are calling any time of the day and join and call. So the Call Blitz community is now live. We've got like about 50 members in there right now, and it's growing. But if you're interested in this type of stuff, I talk about this every week in the community. All those sessions are recorded and available. I'm also bringing in more coaches. So there's 5 or 6 additional people that are now signed up where they do a coaching session. So it's like Peloton for cold calling. You join and there's someone live. You can join a coach, and there's recorded content. And then there's also access to the Call Blitz tool for live calling.
Oh, that is amazing. Okay, well, I think I've got the Call Blitz link in here, and we've also got a listing for Call Blitz on Tenbound, so you can check it out on Tenbound. And Ryan, I've got you for a couple more minutes. If there's any questions, if anybody's still in here, you must be a diehard of this. But it's amazing speaking with experts on something, and in such a niche. You've just been compounding your knowledge about cold calling and this industry over the years, Ryan, and it's just absolutely mind-blowing, your knowledge and expertise in this area. So I just appreciate you sharing this with us.
Yeah, I mean, it's for some reason my punishment. I just love getting kicked in the teeth, I guess. So, no, I mean, I'm happy to answer any questions if people have them live. And then obviously, if you're tuning in on demand, feel free to connect with me, ask questions. And obviously, if you're interested in this type of content, the community is now live for this every week. So we're trying to make cold calling great again, right? So
there you go. There you go. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for coming on. And we'll be sure to put those links in the chat for people that are watching the recording. And just really appreciate sharing all the knowledge.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll get you the links to the copy. There's like a PDF version of the book, so you don't have to go buy it if you don't want to get the Amazon copy. And then the same Audible version of the book is now free in a podcast. So I'll get both those links so you can add it to the show notes.
Thank you.
Yep. Appreciate it.